Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masech the Zevachim daf Chav Hey. We are going to begin on Chav Hamad Aleph by the new Mishnah. Says the Masnisa. Nishbach Adam al Ritzba. Let's say a person is doing the avoda, and the dam, after doing the shchita, from the neck of the behema comes pouring out, and you're not makabel in a kli. So v'osvu, then you start scooping it up from the ground, pasul. It has to be caught while the blood is pouring down from the neck directly into the klisharis. Tanrabanan. The pasuk says, and we'll see this pasuk in its entirety, v'lokach hakoyin hamashiach medamapar. So the kohen gadol will take, which is the kabal sadam, from the dam of the par, v'hevioso el moyed. So what do we learn out from here? So this Gemara says like this: "V'lokach hakoyin hamashiach medam hapar medam hanefesh v'lo medam haor." It has to be from the dam hanefesh. In other words, it has to be coming from the animal and not from the dam of the hide. In other words, if let's say he's taking it from the blood that fell onto the hide of the animal, that's not acceptable. Also, medana tamsis. It cannot be any residual blood. Furthermore, so let's look at Rashi. Mehapari kablena sheim nishmach minat savor al haritzba. Let's say it spilled onto the floor. Vas will pasul shahaylu niskabel mehapar. It has to be mamish coming from the cow. So it says mehapar. That's the drasha. So again, midam hapar dam mehapari kablenu. The blood which comes from the actual carbon you're makabel. These are medam hapar k'dechsiv. If you want to tell me, it just means that you just take the dam the way it's written, madam via feel mixus dam. Then maybe that would come to include even a little bit of the blood. V'yamarav hasheichet, when a person is shchit, the sar shekabel is koil damu shilpar. So we know it cannot be referring to mixus dam, because when it comes to the shchita, you have to be makabel all the blood. Shnemar, as the pasuk says, v'nosan hakoyin min adam. It says, on one hand, the kohen takes from the blood, al karnas mizbach tarsasam lefnei Hashem asher bo hamoed, v'es kol dam hapar. And it says all of the blood. So it's interesting. The pasuk in one context says min adam. However, it also says there's kol hadam hapar yishmach yisam mizbach. So it says all the blood needs to be taken. So therefore, b'yomer Rav Shechet tzar shekabel is kol damo shel parish never v'es kol damo yishboich ella midam hapar. What do we learn out from here? It means dam mehapar yikablenu. So even though it says midam, even like some of the blood, we know it doesn't mean some of the blood because you have to be makabel all of it. So what we do is with the plain words v'ksaver goyin moisifin v'darshan, that you can take one letter away and kind of move it to another word. So midam hapar, we can actually read it as dam mehapar, that the blood has to be from the par. That's what it means. Dam mehapar has to come directly from the animal. Okay. Kufa. Omer Yehuda Marav. Hasheichet, when a person does the shchita, sar shekabel is kol dam yishal par. As we said before, shnever v'es kol dam hapar yishboich. I v'habir b'shirayim ksiv. But this pasuk is actually talking about shirayim. After the zerika, the leftover blood, says Rashi, v'lo b'kabala, it's not talking about me makabel the blood. So im enu inyan l'shirayim. So if it's not, we don't need it to tell us by the leftover blood after the zerika, the leisa l'kuli dam, because you already sprinkled some of it. So obviously it's not talking about that because it's not all the blood, because all the blood isn't there anymore because you already did zrika. So din in the kabbalah, which is a time where there is all the dam, and therefore that's what it's referring to. So by shirayim, we already sprinkled the blood, so it can't mean you put all of it on the side. So it must be referring to something else, namely the kabbalah sadam, Okay. All right. Weiter. Omer Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shmuel. Hashaykhet serach sheyagbia sakin l'mala. You have to lift up your knife up in the air. Says Rashi, shul yipol dam hasakin al hamizrak. We don't want the blood that's on the knife to drip down and go into the bowl. That's what we shenemar v'lachach midam hapar, v'lo midam hapar v'davar acher. We want it to come directly from only the neck of the animal and not from also the knife. V'loi midam hapar v'davar acher. V'dam sakin b'mai mikanechle. So the question is, when it comes to this knife, what do you wipe the blood off of? So Rabbi b'sfas mizrak. What you could do is you wipe it off the edge on the side of the bowl. K'dichsiv kipuri zahav, the wiping of gold, literally. So says Rashi, it's b'sfas mizrak v'loit b'toichai. It's not supposed to go in. Says Rashi, Kari, we read lemizrak in Sefer Ezra al shem kinuach, wiping. Kinu Masechet Schulin ki ika b'leised aprisal l'michpere. So it's interesting. The word kapara, very fascinating. The word kapara is actually wiping. Okay. What exactly that means? Obviously, it's a Shabbos Shuvah drasha. So my nikra kipuri zahab b'Sefer Ezra, I'm doing nikra kach. So he said it's referring to the wiping of the blood. Shekipor hu b'loshin kinuach v'hoy hakoyim mikanech sakin hashchita b'sfas hamizrak. What they do is they scrape the blood off to the edge of the bowl, but not into the bowl itself because it goes against the pasuk, because it has to come only from the animal and not from also the knife. Okay. Amarav Chista, Amarav Yirmiyah bar Abba Hashaykhet, another din, someone who shechts, Sarach Sheyitin, as we continue to Chaf Hamid Beis, it's necessary Sheyitin Varidin Lateicha Kli, that he has to have the veins or the main arteries, it needs to go directly into the kli. Says Rashi, the nahavi kabbalah mahapar shapir. Therefore, it's going to be the proper zrika. Rather, the best kabbalah is that you make sure that the areas where the most leakage of blood is going to be, which is the varidin, is going to go directly into the kli. Okay, directly into the bowl. Okay. So when it comes to these veins, these main arteries, you have to make sure that they see the airspace of the kli, which basically what it's come to tell you is that it should be like just above the kli. So you have the kli here, and it should be like hovering above, so that it'll easily drip directly into the kli. Okay. Sarach shiru aver kli. B'mini Rav Asi Rav Yochanan. Haimekabel v'nivchasai shulei mizrak ad shlo higia dam aver mahu. Let's say the bottom of the kli caved in, and it was above the airspace, but not in the airspace. So you have the kli, and the blood is going down. It hasn't yet reached the air of the part of the kli, and the bottom of it somehow broke, which means there's no way that dam is going to actually get into the kli. So therefore, is that valid or not? Aver shein soifo lanuach kamenuach dami oilo kamunach dami. Do we say that the fact that it is up in the air, is it considered as though it's actually kamunach dami, and therefore it's a good kabbalah? Says Rashi, Ashel gia dam la'aver mizrak l'bein doifni mizrak ba'oid hadam l'mala mehen. The blood was still above the kli. Miu al keneged avirohen. It's like right keneged avir. It's about to, based on gravity, go down. Dehavaridin royin aver kli be'inan. So the question is avir shein soifa nuach kagoyin high shasidim shul of lipoil actually yenuach dam oseicha, that's going to fall? Is it kamunach dam havali kli sheniskabel v'nishmach dekashlo oisvai? So obviously the blood's going to fall to the floor. The question is maybe it's okay is if the dam was caught in the kli, and then because there was, let's say, a crack and it drips, then you could scoop it up, the dam. But maybe in this situation you can't because it never was kamunach. And therefore it's like it spilled from the neck directly onto the floor, and therefore it's usher. It's going to be not good. So that's the kasha. So mahu avishin sefla nuach kamunach dami or low kamunach dami. So malay tenisua. We actually have support to this. Chavius, when it comes to literally a barrel, shmunachas tachas hazinuk mayim, says Rashi, you have a tzinor, you have a pipe, hamakalech mayim mehar zokuf, that you have like water flowing on a slope down mountain, v'akiluach makalech lemirachik, v'noifel chavius, and it's dripping and going into a barrel, v'chavisu ein munachas sham, it's not like there, l'sham kiddush mechatos. And there you want to know if you're able to use this as mechatos, this water. So question is that a problem? So you have siruf. So again, you have this pipe, which is, you have a barrel that's resting underneath this pipe, and the water is going down. So we say that it's considered to be pasul. You can't put a kli by the airspace and then be makabel its water flowing down. Says Rashi, v'afol chutza lo lamala mi'oyne keneged avira. Kivan shehigiu mayim keneged avira. Because once the water reaches that airspace, harihin kumunachim b'toicha. It's ki'u like it's already in the barrel. Pasuk le chiyusayu v'yanan mayim chayim el kli be'inan. It has to be mayim chayim, like stream water. Alma aver kumunach dami. So the fact that it went into the barrel, so therefore that is considered already like it is munach, and therefore because that it no longer has the status of mayim chayim, and that's why it apostles. Fine. So tzira pia was zikuk mayim shebaseicha psulin. So if you have a barrel underneath the pipe, apostle shebechutzla ksherin. So hi mai. So hi my boy mine. So hi ma boy mine. Avishin seif lanuach. You want to ask a question about if it's not going to land. The kapashli avish seif lanuach. But this is a case where it actually did go into the barrel. So what are you talking about? It's the case we're asking is the blood dripped down and there was a cave in on the bottom of the of the kli, so it never actually landed. So now you're going to bring a proof that this is not considered to be mayim chayim because it went into the chavius, and the chavius is kamunach, but it is munach. This is not a case of shesoifel she'en savanuach. It's soifel anuach. So how is this a good example? Because here the barrel is complete. So tarti kaboy mine. It's actually there's two questions. It's an imtim salaymer. Avishin sefla nuach lav kamunach dami. Maybe the fact that again this dam that's falling down into this kli which is broken is not kamunach dami, and therefore it would passel if it fell when it falls to the floor. You can't use that dam. So avish sefla nuach mai. But let's say it's the opposite case. Let's say it is seifla nuach. You have the dam underneath, and underneath is a kli, but for whatever reason, let's say the person moved the kli while it was about to drip, so that kli was really seifla nuach. So therefore, we're using a proof the second case. Rabbi Yosef Masti Hacha, Rav Kahana Masti Chavius Bominei partially Chavius Rabba Chavis. So we asked a question about the barrel, and it was the answer. Rabba Masti Chavius Bominei. He asked a question about the barrel, partially Mizrak, and he ended up giving an answer again about the kli. Iyatam Moida B'Mizrak Shi Efshaloi Blo Zinuk. So he said that it's impossible without the in the case of the barrel with the pipe underneath. Okay, Let's look at Rashi over here. Kishashaychet al avir kli. When a person shechs and the kli is right underneath it, ein hadam shaisis bimkaimai. The blood doesn't go directly into its place. El mikaleach l'roiche v'kli ad l'holon. It sometimes goes toward its width. V'i avir shesoifa nuach lav kamunach dami. And if you want to tell me it's like it didn't land, nimsa kashi yari l'kli min avir, when it lands into the kli from the airspace, hu ba v'lo min hapar. Maybe it's not really coming from the par. But tar oimra dam min hapar yikablana. It has to come from the actual par. So you can ask the same kasha that maybe it's still problematic. The gabi chavis nami avir shesoifa nuach hu ukamanuach dami psuan. Okay. Tanan Hasan. So we learned over there, Nasan Yadai o Raglo o Ali Arakais, Kadei Shiavru Mayim L'chavius Psulun. So this is talking about the Mechatos. And let's say you put your hand or your foot over there and the water is pouring down. So that's a problem. It will end up postulating for Mechatos. And the reason is, well, first of all, let's look at Rashi. That it doesn't mamish go directly into the barrel. You put your hand above it, above the pipe, lasos kein marzev, to make your hand like the gutter, so that it should go through your hand into the barrel. Or whether, also, let's say it lands on leaves of vegetables, which are fit for achila, and here's the key words of Rashi, the makabel tuma. They're puzzle because it anything which is makabel tuma, like a person is makabel tuma, so therefore it's going to be pasling umechatos. However, it says alikonim v'ali egoizim ksherim. When it comes to for reeds and for almonds, it's kosher because for whatever reason they're not makabel tuma. Zeklal. This is what it says explicitly. Davar makabel tuma psulin, like people is makabel tuma. Now we're saying makabel tuma ksherin. So minahanamili, how do we know this? Because the pasuk says, and the pasuk says, ach mayin ubor mikvi mayim yetar, that these are the means of becoming tahar. V'anogeya benivlosam yitma, anyone who touches an veil becomes tameh. Now, what do we learn out from here? It says yetar. Of Yosan Alidei Tahara, that its creation should be Alidei Tahara, Tehei, so it should be. In other words, it has to be directly connected to it, but not something which potentially is Makabel Tuma. Says Rashi, Have Yosan Shalmayim Hamataharim Alidei Tahara Tehei. It has to come from something pure. Mehava Oisam Liyos Mikva O Kadosh, Havi Minahava Oisam Alidei Davar She'in Makabel Tuma. It's something which is not connected to something which is tamei as opposed to a person. Okay. Of Yosan alidei tahara. Amar Rabchia Omer Rabbi Yochanan Zoisameres. This teaches us our kli kikli dami. The airspace of a kli is like a kli, says Rashi. Minatani. Nosin yadai posel. The fact that it says you put your hand there posels, so it must be, says Rashi, ein mayim shaisasin miyadai lekli b'shtitata ela b'havara kishiyatz miyada mekalchen mehen al pnei reichev. Alma, what do we see? Mishiyatz miyada, when the water leaves your hand, al pnei aver havli ki'ilu shasu miyada lekli. It's ki'ilu like it went from your hand directly into the kli. Okay, so therefore aver kli is kikli dami. Maybe it was taka dripping directly, not through your hand. Or Malay tirda. This is as Rashi says, shaita. That's a foolish thing to say. Kadeshi yavru mayim l'chavius tanan. Says Rashi, b'havara b'kiluach mashma. So it was obviously going through this type of a gutter. In other words, didn't go directly there. Bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan me'idusa shab tzaduk. Based on his testimony, Nishnis Mishnazu did not Hayed Reb Tzaduk al Hazaichlin. When it comes to flowing water, she kilchan bali egoizin that it went through the egoism, these leaves, shank share it, because as you said, it's not something which is makabel tuma. This was a actual situation that took place. And they said it was kosher. Let's say a person who cuts the ear of the cow, and only afterwards there's do kabbalah sadam. So apostle, that will apostle. Shnemar, as the pasuk says, "V'lokach hakoyin Mashiach medam apar." The kohen gadol takes from the dam. So what do we learn out from that? V'lokach medam apar, par shahay kfar. It must be whole from before. It cannot have any blemish or anything cut on the animal, and therefore, if it would be, that would apostle it. So Ashen Kashi Kadashim. I understand Kashi Kadashim because that's what the pasuk's talking about. So Kadashim Kalmanol. So Amarabba Tanya, we learned regarding the Karban Pesach, it says Set Tomim Zachar Ben Shana Tiyeh, that it should be these criteria. It has to be a male animal, it has to be a sheep or a goat. It has to be Tomim, it can't be a Balmum, it has to be less than a year old. Shei Tomim Uben Shana B'Shah Shchita. It means that the time of Shchita has to reach that time. How do you know that it has to have these criteria even then? Not just that, let's say it was fine b'shah shchita, but not later on. Kol haviyasav, all the avoda liyu ela tam uben shana, they all have to be fine even at that time. However, says Rashi, b'shah shchita, fine. Right, so Ashkan Kachi Kadashim, the Hayim Bepar Helm Davar Shil Tzibur Ksiv, fine. So Eis V'Abaya, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Kol Zevachim Shabbatayra, when it comes to all the sacrifices, Shnishtayer Mehen Kazayas Basar, if let's say there's even a Kazayas Basar left, oh Kazayas Chaylev, Zarik Esadam, you're still able to sprinkle the blood. So how can you tell me that even if it's sliced a little bit, you can't do the Zrikas Adam? We see that even if all there's left is the kazayas, it doesn't need to be whole. So tirguma aben shana. So what does that mean? So the requirement of it being complete is even through all the stages is that it has to be a ben shana, less than a year, even through all the other voda. Mika midi the b'shash shchita ben shana b'shas hoylach of zrika ben shtayim. Understand, how is that possible? If it's less than a year old, at Shechita 5 seconds later, it's the same day. So that even hours make a difference. So it's not we go like by a birthday; it could actually be going by hours. Says Rashi, El Af Mishal L'Shah Shim Noyed B'Nisan B'Yud Daled. Let's say he was born on the 14th of Nisan, B'Tesh Shois on the 9th hour, B'Shachnu L'Shana Haba. B'Yudal b'Nisan, you checked it on his birthday, but it's B'Tesh Shois, and it's the 9th hour. Asur Lizrog Domo Basiris. You can't do the Zrika on the 10th hour, Shkvar Over Shanasa, because the year has already passed. So it's an interesting point that even if, let's say, at the time of the Shechita, it was less than a year old, but all the other stages also must be less than a year old. Okay, we're going to stop there. Fine, let's look at question 7. Me'eza din desani b'brais halamad rava d'shais psulos b'kanshim. So it's ben shana. Let's see what it writes. Desani be'ina shehi ben shana by Karban Pesach lo rak b'shchita el ad zrika. V'lo mishkachas lo denasa ben shtayim ben shchita l'zrika el ishais psulos. It's only if you hold that hours will actually apostle it. Okay. Which means it's pretty unbelievable. Because you have to literally know, which makes sense. I mean, it does say a year old, 2 years. You have to know how old your animal is before you shecht it, and before you do it for certain avodas. Let's see. Question maybe TA5. I don't know. Let's see. Behemish nasas balmum. An animal becomes a balmum. O sha'avar shanasal achar shchita o achar kabbalah madin l'maskana. So he said, Balmum, if it's before the Kabbalah, it apostles. So Achar Kabbalah, it's kosher. However, when it comes to Avar Shanosav, Kaidim Zrika Psula. So again, that's the distinction. It's only by when it comes to the year, that's where we say that even by Zrika has to be before that time. Let's look at question TB5, not an easy answer. Maharayim and Mizrak Lenidain shel Avish Asayfla Nuach. So how do we know this din that we said that when it comes to the kli, if the dam is about to go in, whether or not let's say there was a crack in it, right? Whether or not we say Avish Shein Sayfla Nuach, actually shel Avish Sayfla Nuach. That's Avish Shein Sayfla Nuach. But we learned when it came to the case of the chavius that it's actually a case of the opposite, that it's considered to be a case where it's seifla nuach, right? So that's avish seifla nuach, and this was the whole question. We said, how do we see this? We tartigam aboyme im tim solemer avishin seifla nuach lav kamun dami avish seifla nuach mai. So on that, where we are pashit, we answered it by the chavius, by the barrel. Let's see what I wrote. Im nosan es adam ba'avir hakli al gabav v'nafol b'kli im yesh nekev im ze keilu hamashke noch. That's the question. That's not the answer. The answer that they wanted is regarding legabe mechatos, right? By the mechatos, Be'inon, we require that it must be Maim Chayim. V'hacha, so over here, because it went into the barrel, since it went into the barrel, it's not Maim Chayim in the apostles.